Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in to a very fun Monday Night Football edition of Establish a Show, Showdown style, between one of the best games of the year I think we have coming up, especially when you take into account time of year, playoff implications, two of the top teams in the AFC between the Bengals and the Bills, one that I think many people probably looked ahead to if you are stacking Week 17 games in best ball. I know a lot of implications for many people in season-long best ball tournaments tonight, but this is a really fun one ahead. I'm Gary Hartman. Apologize for the lack of higher quality than you might usually get from me. I am doing the show on the road, so you're dealing with kind of the dinky Apple headphones here, but hopefully I sound all right, look all right. Obviously joined, as always, by the Showdown King for what, again, really fun one. Cody Main, how you doing tonight?
I am good. A true professional, a true corporate shill. Gary Hartman doing the show while on the road, doing everything. A real company man, if you will. And as you mentioned, this was the one we were all looking forward to all off season, all throughout the regular season. Best ball finals tonight. Shout out to industry staple fantasy football expert Pat Kerrane, who is going to be anti-sweating this game.
Yeah.
As he hopes to hold on to $2 million in the BBM 3. Bunch of six sweats out there, I'm sure, for all of you guys in your season-long leagues in your best ball leagues. But this one, from a showdown perspective, is really interesting. We know we have a 1.5 point spread, 49.5, 50-ish point total, two really fun offenses, and I think a lot of ways to go. And we have $1 million up top, which we haven't necessarily had all season. And I think because of that, because I imagine DraftKings thinks they're getting a little bit more of a more casual crowd tonight, pricing is pretty soft. So I think we can build some pretty sick teams. And I think that's a good jumping off point for this slate, because it is a really fun slate.
Yeah, good luck to Pat tonight. Obviously, good friend of ETR. Used to work there, did a lot of great work, and good friend of a lot of the people here at ETR. Don't know him personally, but wishing him the absolute best of luck. Which in one of the best sweats you could possibly get in fantasy, maybe one of the best we've ever had. So with the $2 million up top, so definitely wishing him the best of luck. Obviously, there's not much that needs to be said that if you're not watching the show, you already know about this game. Obviously, high game total, I think close to 50 points, close spread, lots of implications as far as kind of the way the 1, 2, 3 seed stuff's going to play out in the AFC still between these two teams in Kansas City. So, lots to play for. Really exciting stuff. Cincinnati at home here. I think the Bills are 1.5, 2 point favorites, something like that. Which, road favorites always scares me a little bit. I guess it's up to 3 now with a 50.5 point total. Wow. So should be a lot of fun. Talk some macro view here, because really not seeing 5-1s, which I guess makes sense. But if we're expecting so much scoring, you never know, right? It could easily be that way. So I think, 11 total percent of 5-1s either way is a little low here for the way I might want to play. But any macro takes for you?
Yeah, I agree. And the reason why we're not seeing a lot of 1-5 or 5-1 stuff tonight is because of the way the slate's priced. You have really attractive skill position values on both sides of the ball, and we'll get to that when we get to the positional groups. But that's why we're seeing it pretty condensed around 3-3, around 4-2, and 5-1, or excuse me, 2-4. I think you might see a little bit more 5-1 than is shown here, because it's so easy to double and even triple stack tonight with Josh Allen, that you might see some of that with Tyler Bass or the Bills DST mixed in there. It becomes pretty easy when you have Dawson Knox priced the way he is, when you have Isaiah McKenzie priced the way he is, and of course Stephon Diggs there as the everlasting alpha in the Bills pass catching core. I'm with you. I think that if I were building an MME portfolio tonight of 150 or even a 20 max, I would probably want more than the 10 to 11% projected exposure here on both sides. Really what you're hoping for is maybe this game plays now 2 standard deviations beyond what the expected spread is right now. Maybe it's a 7 to 10 point game one way or another.
Right.
And if you get that, the way these offenses play, you're certainly going to have some opportunities to get some 5-1s, to get some 1-5s, to funnel their way into winning roster constructions.
Yep. And all that's to say, and George pointing out in chat, optimizers and things are going to want you to split this down the middle more. Yeah. Obviously, tons of values and high ceiling plays on both sides. And as much as we like to try to get unique with the 5-1s or 1-5s, I could easily see 4-2 or 3-3. So we'll talk through all the options here. It's also going to be a game with cash lineups. We're probably going to consider both quarterbacks. So we'll talk about what makes sense there as well. So let's, with that being said, let's dive right into quarterback. Obviously, two really fun ones here with Allen and Burrow. Josh Allen, and you wrote it in your article as well, just I think ridiculously underpriced at 11.4 here for what the ceiling is. You see a 35.4 ceiling projection, a full 5 points higher than Joe Burrow, who I also like quite a bit here. So I have a hard time fading either of these quarterbacks. I would want to at least be around the field in tournaments. I think in Burrow's case, I'd want to get over the field for total ownership there at only 65%. That's just kind of my first gut instinct, but curious your takes and thoughts here on the quarterback position.
Yeah, I'll knock out the cash game stuff first because I think it's really relatively easy here. Josh Allen and Joe Burrow are both cash game musts, just with the way we expect this game to be played, and the fact that both skill position cores are 100% healthy tonight, not dealing with any injuries. And it's just the easiest way to soak up the pass game volume is just to roster both quarterbacks and cash games. You get the highest floor, highest ceiling combo. And I think we have the salary, as you mentioned, Josh Allen just a little bit too cheap here. I don't think this current iteration of Josh Allen should ever be below 12.4, 12.6 in Showdown. And as I mentioned, the way that DraftKings prices slate is just kind of to appeal to a more casual audience. It's really easy to build teams tonight. And so for that reason, Josh Allen should be in every cash game lineup tonight. Same goes for Joe Burrow. From a tournament perspective, though, I think that Josh Allen, despite being the highest owned player on the slate, despite being the highest projected owned captain, ownership is still a little bit too light for me. If I was building 10 teams, I think Josh Allen would be on 9 or all 10 of those teams. If I was building 10 teams, I think he would be on 3 or 4, maybe even 5 of those as a captain. So I think that the field is just a little bit light here if we expect those ownership projections to hold. I would want close to 90 or even 100% Josh Allen and 30% more of him at captain. I think you're on mute.
Sorry. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. Obviously, we know what the floor ceiling combo is on both these guys. I have no problem attempting to get both of them in as many lineups as possible. The question is, even in tournaments, and the question is, what does construction look like around that? So we'll try to talk through some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, hard to poke holes. Yes, both defenses are playing well. Bengals particularly have been really solid defensively in the second half of the year. But you mentioned both teams fully healthy here with a full plethora of weapons on both sides. So I just think that if you expect this game to play up, I'd be surprised to not see one or both quarterbacks in an optimal lineup here.
I will say one point in favor of Burrow, because I feel like I kind of skipped over Burrow. We've seen this Bills offense go a little bit more run heavy of late. Part of that likely weather induced, part of that likely game environment induced. But this Bengals offense is just fully shoving it down opposing defenses' throats with their passing game. They have really little interest in running at this point. Both teams operating very quickly. So while Joe Burrow doesn't necessarily give you the same ceiling and floor combo from a rushing perspective as Josh Allen does,
right,
this Bengals offense is 100% committed to the pass. Now you have all of their weapons healthy. Again, really, really tough to poke holes in either one of these guys, and that's why it's so easy to lock them in cash.
Yep. And saw what Tom Brady was still able to do in an NFL game last night. Joe Burrow obviously has that 400-yard, 3 touchdown, one sneak in his outcomes as well, which obviously would be more than enough. All right, let's talk running back here, which I think is obviously the less interesting position of the skill positions tonight, considering how much we're talking up these past games. Let's start on the Cincinnati side, where we've definitely seen Samaje Perine eat more into the base work since he had the couple weeks there where he was the bell cow when Mixon was out. But certainly Joe Mixon is a guy that we trust the role. We know the ceiling's there. 9,000 for him. I don't mind using these guys in stacks as well in my captain quarterback lineups for sure. I feel similarly on both sides of that coin for the Bills. We'll talk about them in a second. But Mixon, 9,000, 8% captain, 42% total. How are you handling him tonight? And then Perine as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of like lukewarm on Joe Mixon. I think he's kind of fringe playable for cash, and because he's kind of fringe playable for cash at 9K, I think that might inflate ownership in tournaments. As you alluded to, he is giving away some more work since he's returned to Samaje Perine because of how well Perine played in his absence. So still leading in rushing share, still leading in red zone rushing share, in attempts inside the 5-yard line, and target share. So really he has kind of full control as the RB1A in this offense. But I do think there are scenarios where Samaje Perine eats more into his base down and pass down work. And for that reason, I actually think Samaje Perine is pretty interesting for tournaments if we expect that ownership to hold. And I kind of do. I think it might even come in below that, because as we'll get to here with some of these pass catchers, Dawson Knox, who I alluded to, Hayden Hurst, another guy, Isaiah McKenzie, a lot of these pass catchers on both sides are egregiously underpriced. And I don't think Samaje Perine is as underpriced And because of that, I think it will keep ownership in check as kind of leverage off of his more popular teammate. I think Samaje Perine is pretty interesting in tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting call. And as you mentioned, his price, is high enough where it's going to keep the field, I think, away. So I do agree with you in being interesting. They like him in the pass game as well. So I like him as a stack option too. All right, Buffalo side of things, we have three guys that are playing right now. Still mostly a two-man split between Devin Singletary and James Cook. Singletary still, to me, is the guy that they trust in these close games, in the money drives, the money possessions. So I think I definitely am most interested in him, but the Bengals have definitely been good against the run. Nyheim Hines is sprinkling in a little bit. James Cook definitely has a slight edge in the pass game. You can make arguments for all these guys. More interested in the Bills receivers for sure. But if I'm looking for kind of unique combinations, getting these guys more involved in Allen lineups, I think will be a way I look to do it. How are you approaching this Bills backfield?
Yeah, you mentioned that they trust Singletary a little bit more, and they're going to him in the money drive situations when the chips are down. And Adam talked about this a lot with Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White, that like these teams, when the chips are down, they want to trust these guys that have been around a little bit longer, have been on the team and been through these runs before. I think that's the same case with Buffalo tonight with Devin Singletary. Again, still a bunch for the Bills to be playing for tonight. And I think that we see maybe this gap widen a little bit. As I was writing up this slate, I thought James Cook was kind of interesting, $1,400 cheaper. Didn't expect much ownership, but now that I've had a chance to run ownership, you see there that they're basically projecting for the same amount. I think it comes in pretty close to 2020 or 25-20 one way or another. But I think the ceiling on Devin Singletary is higher if we expect them to lean on the veteran running back in a game that certainly matters. I think he offers pretty good leverage as well. A guy that I would like to get more of than the field, if at all possible tonight.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And even though Cook's been used a little bit more in the passing role, Singletary does kind of get like his 2 to 5 targets a game, almost every single game. And you never know what he could do with that. It's not bad. At least it's not a zero in the pass game for Singletary as well. Any interest in Nyheim Hines at 1,200? I would not play him and Cook together personally, but any interest in Hines in general?
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of been squeezed out of late. For a little bit there, it seemed as though there had kind of been a three-man committee developing, and all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks, it seems like it has really kind of gone back to just this two-man committee between Singletary and Cook. He should certainly be a part of an MME pool. I would imagine you're probably going to have to manually boost him if you want to get some exposure to him. But in smaller field and hand-built stuff, I think it's kind of tough to get there.
Yep, I agree with that. Gilliam, would you throw him in your pool there? He's projecting for something as a kind of a maybe falls into the end zone.
Yeah, I think so. We've seen those, like one reception for 5 yards and a touchdown for Reggie Gilliam, Quentin Morris, kind of the same way when we get to tight end. Those guys project in similar roles. At 1%, he might be the guy that you need to separate, and also the guy you need to fit in all of these studs. Yeah. So yeah, worth the sprinkle, probably 3 to 5% max in a 150 pool, but he should certainly be a part of your pool.
Yeah, I agree with you there. All right. Let's get to the fun stuff. I'm going to break it down by team. Let's start, I guess, Buffalo's kicker. So let's start by, we'll go wide receiver and tight end. We'll just go by team. So let's go Buffalo. Stephon Diggs is more than due. We have had 3 straight weeks now of the Bills' true number one alpha receiver really being disappointing in the money weeks for fantasy. I think on DraftKings, we're looking at 4.6, 10.7, 6.7 DraftKings points. Those are Stephon Diggs' last 3 weeks. And the Bengals are no walk in the park against number one receivers. Silva broke it down pretty well in his matchups column about how strong they've been. Yet, I want to lean into game environment here. I want to lean into them making it a point to get their best receiving option more involved. His 10-4 is definitely not cheap. 50% total ownership still, 11%. I think he's worthy of his own conversation before we get into the secondary guys here.
Yeah, so I mean, we can talk about this from a macro perspective on all of these expensive guys, because you are going to have to take some stands and some relatively uncomfortable ones at that. As we get to the Cincinnati side, you can't get overweight positions on all of Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. So you will have to make some uncomfortable decisions tonight with respect to which one of these or which two of these expensive guys that you end up paying up for. Stephon Diggs looks fantastic. I mean, there are very few holes to poke in his game other than the 3-game slump that he's been on over the last 3 weeks. And again, as I mentioned in the article, I think that is just small sample variance. I think that he still possesses one of the NFL's best roles, 27.5% target share, 33.8% air yard share, is up in the top 5 in those metrics throughout the entire league. So again, very few holes to poke in Stefon Diggs' game. The one that you can is how good Cincinnati is at defending perimeter wide receivers. And that is a little bit of a concern for Stefon Diggs, but I think one that I don't want to overweight too much because he's a guy that's matchup proof, one of the NFL's best wide receivers, from an efficiency perspective. I don't want to give too much credit to Cincinnati's defense against somebody like Stefon Diggs. So I think ownership is relatively efficient. If you're one that wants to take a really heavy stance on Stefon Diggs, I can't talk you out of it. I think he's a phenomenal play tonight.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. You mentioned kind of having to take a stand. If you were, and you see Chase and Diggs there, very similar ownership, and we'll talk more at length about Cincinnati guys in a second, but I want to talk more macro. What would it look like to get both those guys in your lineup together? You probably are leaving out one of the quarterbacks, right? In those instances, unless you're getting really weird.
Yeah. I think you're sacrificing a quarterback, which I think is certainly okay. We've seen it plenty of times, even in these high scoring game environments where one quarterback ends up being optimal most often because you see one quarterback carrying along a couple of his own pass catchers, and then you get that classic bring back, like we talk about on NFL main slates, where you get a double stack and a bring back. And I think that we could see a situation like that tonight, as if you had a Joe Burrow captain with two Bengals pass catchers, and you bring it back with Stefon Diggs, for example. In that lineup, you're probably sacrificing Josh Allen, but you're hoping to soak up a majority of that production via Diggs. I think those lineups are going to be common tonight. I think that they're going to certainly project really well from a ceiling perspective. So I'm okay in tournaments, certainly sacrificing one of the quarterbacks in order to have a good position on their pass catchers.
Yep. And we say that sometimes, right? If like someone like Chase is going to have one of those insane Jamar Chase 3 touchdown games, you can get exposure to what you need out of the Bengals receivers, just offense just through him.
Exactly.
If it makes sense for the rest of your roster construction instead of getting it through Burrow. So we'll talk about those guys in a minute. I want to talk about finish off the Buffalo conversation. Gabe Davis, something else I think you wrote pretty well in your article. I mean, if it was not for that week 5 explosion game, how would we be considering Gabe Davis for the whole season? Certainly a bust for best ball picks in the 4th and 5th round. Certainly a disappointing overall season. I think, and Silva talked about this too, I think he's just a pedestrian wide receiver 2 talent. What he has going in his favor is he's a wide receiver 2 on maybe the best offense in the league. His role, consistent targets, 6 targets each of the last 2 weeks to find the end zone last week for 12.5 points. I mean, he had 20 points in week 10 as well. So we're, 3 games, two slates this year where he can, consider, I think, what you need on this slate to be a captain performance. I think just given that we know those range are in there, though, I'd be interested in the captain spot for Gabe Davis, 6,400. How you handling the Bills' number 2 receiver?
And that might be the appropriate way to get your exposure to Gabe Davis if he's really going to be 31.3% owned. When I ran ownership, I was hoping it would be, I mentioned sub 30% in the article. I think in my mind, when I wrote that in the article, I was thinking sub 20% because it is really tough to trust Gabe Davis given what we've seen out of him. And it's been a full season long sample now. We've got, 3 games that are like useful fantasy games, but when you're talking about a showdown slate where you need particularly in a game environment that projects for 50 total points, you really need a good performance out of him, even at 6,400. So I think the way that you alluded to there, getting your exposure to Gabe Davis at captain might be the way to do it because of his wide range of outcomes. I don't think he's going to give you too many middling performances. I think they're either going to be pretty bad or they're going to be like the 35 points that we saw in week 5. Even the 20 points that we saw recently, would probably be okay at his price tag. But the target share is not all that inspiring. What really gets you to hang on to Gabe Davis is the 28.8% air yard share, the 15.3 yard ADOT, 26.5% of his targets coming at least 20 yards downfield. So if Gabe Davis hits, I think he's generally going to hit in a way that you're probably pretty happy with him at captain. So maybe I come in underweight 30% total Gabe Davis exposure, but maybe I have 10% of that exposure at captain or 7% of that exposure at captain and get an overweight stance that way.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I'm interested in doing with Davis. I'd rather get over the field on captain, don't mind being under the field on total ownership. But that's kind of the way, because those explosion games, we saw it in the divisional round last year. He has some and if this game goes like that Chiefs Bills game where you had the 3 touchdowns to it, whatever, you just want him a captain at that point. You don't want him anywhere else. So that's kind of what you're hoping for. All right. Before we talk about Knox, which I think is its own conversation, McKenzie, Beasley, Shakir, that's a max 1 spot for me. I know you alluded to it as well. McKenzie, obviously the most popular of these three. We've seen him have success, but they're really all starting to split work, with Beasley starting to creep his way in there. At that ownership, I'm less interested in Beasley. McKenzie. But overall, three guys that make my pool in a max one spot here.
What a mess this has really devolved into of late. Khalil Shakir was a guy throughout the offseason that we had hoped would earn a role late. We didn't expect Cole Beasley to be re-signed with the team and stealing a couple of routes, which is frustrating to say the least. And then Isaiah McKenzie starting to give away some of his role. It really has kind of devolved into a three-man rotation. I think we should expect Cole Beasley to work in a little bit more than he did even last week, where he ran 3 routes, and it just becomes kind of a headache. I am with you. A max one rule. I think of this max one rule, I would prefer to come in underweight on McKenzie if he's truly going to garner 25, maybe upwards of 30% ownership, and instead get an overweight stance on an $800 Khalil Shakir, who actually led this trio in routes run last week. So it's a gamble, certainly a gamble, because we don't know exactly how this route participation is going to shake out. But the Bengals can be beaten by opposing slot receivers. And it's a chance I'd want to take on an $800 Khalil Shakir if he's only going to be 7 to 8% owned. So of the three, he's my favorite. I think Isaiah McKenzie's projection is strong enough that you might see him in some cash game roster constructions. I think I would caution against that, just given the unknowns and the wider range of outcomes there.
Agreed. Nothing else to add there. Dawson Knox running hot right now. Found the end zone. What was it? The last 3 contests. So he's been over double-digit points each of the last 3. Definitely like to see it. It's also, his target share has been up a little bit as well. At least 5 targets each of those games. So, glad to see it for the best ball bags and things like that. I do think I prefer him over that group of slot receivers a little bit with the touchdown equity, but it's close. I think I don't make many rules on him. He can just kind of go in my double and triple Allen stuff. And I think he's a solid play at 26% total ownership.
Yeah, I agree. I think ownership here is pretty efficient. Could even be a little bit higher on somebody like Dawson Knox. I think he's also a guy that is fringe cash game playable because he doesn't have those same playing time concerns that we have with McKenzie and Beasley and Shakir, kind of being in a 3-man rotation, assuming full health. And I know he dealt with a back injury towards the tail end of last week's game. I haven't seen final practice reports, but it looked like he was removed and practicing in full. If that's the case, we should expect him to be out
designation.
There for,
No designation.
No. Okay, so that's good. So I think we should expect him to be out there for 90 to 100% of the team's routes, and in a Josh Allen-led offense at 4,800. I think that's just a little bit too cheap. I would not scoff at any cash game lineup that flipped Dawson Knox, and I think he makes a perfect second piece in your captain Josh Allen double stacks.
Yep, agreed there. All right, Cincinnati. Tight end 2s here. Quentin Morris, kind of a similar boat with Gilliam. Makes your pool. You never know, type of thing. I don't have much to add there. All right, Cincinnati side. We alluded to kind of the macro stuff with the 10K guys. Let's have the Chase Higgins conversation. I know people in chat asking, how are you approaching these guys together when one of them is your captain? Obviously, Burrow captain and Burrow lineups, you have no problem playing these guys together, a traditional Bengals double like we'll do on a main slate. But if you were going Chase captain or Higgins captain, are you docking the other guy?
I think you should dock, just given the construct of this slate and the other options that we have priced around him. If we get the alpha Jamar Chase game where he not only beats his median projection, but is the optimal captain, it's going to steal opportunities away from T. Higgins. And if you're saying it doesn't steal opportunities away from T. Higgins and they both put up alpha performances, then it's more likely that Joe Burrow is the optimal captain in that regard anyway. So yes, I think if you have Jamar Chase at captain, you should be docking T. Higgins. It would, for me, be a slight dock. I'm okay rostering them together. I just want it less frequently than optimizers would likely give it to me, and vice versa. If I get a T. Higgins captain team, I'm less likely to have Jamar Chase in those lineups. I don't think we should rule it out together entirely, because it is possible that these guys just soak up 75, 80% of the team's total passing game production. But I think it is less likely if we get one of their alpha games that the other guy can be carried along with them.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. For example, if I expect this game to play close and up, and I have a T. Higgins captain lineup, and I can afford a 10K receiver, I think I'd rather it be Diggs over Chase in those instances. Like, I'd rather just play for the back and forth and the bring back in that case type of thing. Obviously that's a kind of broad example, but I'm saying if I could just fit one in that 10K range, I think in those instances I would prefer that. Speaking of Higgins and Chase, do you have a preference between these two guys tonight? Obviously, what do we got? $800 difference in price. Chase has been the guy that we've seen have some monster games, but obviously we know T has a ceiling as well and is going to come with cheaper price and less ownership.
Yeah, for anyone that's hung around for these showdown shows throughout the course of the regular season, anytime the Bengals have been on the slate and both of these guys have been healthy, I've incorrectly called which guy is going to get squeezed in tournaments, and I'm kind of nervous that I'm going to do it again. But if you're running optimizers with any sort of decent projection model tonight, you're probably going to end up with 60 to 70% Jamar Chase and probably closer to 15 or 20% T. Higgins. And to me, that is usually a good indicator that the guy who is not popping in optimals using projections is going to be the guy that ends up getting squeezed. T. Higgins is only $800 cheaper than Jamar Chase, but he's projects for us nearly 4.5, 5 points worse. And I think to me, as I'm looking at our ownership projections, I think we could even see Jamar Chase push 60%. I think T. Higgins could come closer to 20% total ownership. And if that's the case, I think given the given the fact that T. Higgins still has those big games well within his range of outcomes, I think I would prefer T at those projected ownership rates. But if what we have here holds, then I think Jamar Chase is just slightly better. So it kind of comes down to where you think this ownership lands in the contest that you're playing and some of the smaller field stuff that I'm playing, some of the sharper fields. I do expect T. Higgins to end up getting squeezed in favor of Diggs, in favor of Chase. And I think because of that, he would be my preferred option.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think he's super interesting. Obviously, a little bit less defensive attention than Jamar. You do get the salary saving. You're getting a little leverage on the field. And also, like, it's not like the role's been bad since that weird week 14 where he was active but didn't play. So the last 2 weeks where Chase has kind of gotten his feet back underneath him since injury. And Higgins has, he still had, according to DraftKings, at least 17 total targets over the last 2 weeks. He had that big game last week with 9 targets, 130 yards, almost of a touchdown. So we know those ceiling type games are still there with Higgins on the other side of Chase. We've seen it throughout. I definitely like them together just fine, but I'd probably prefer Burrow captain in those instances and kind of 4-2 Bengal stuff or something like that. But I agree with you. I think they're both excellent plays, though. The more interesting conversation, I think, is this Boyd Trenton Irwin one. We saw Trenton Irwin start to eat in a little bit more to that work and, have a big, 2-touchdown game. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago? And so I think certainly they're starting to trust him more. Boyd did get hurt in one of those games, I know, that we're referencing here. I'd still prefer Boyd if I'm going for a Bengals wide receiver 3, especially now that they're only $600 apart. But Irwin doesn't seem like the field's going to play at all. I do not really want to play those two guys together, given how much targets will condense around Chase and Higgins overall. But I know that could be a little restrictive on a one-game slate where anything weird can happen. How are you dealing with the kind of these tertiary Bengals receivers?
Yeah, definitely a max one for Tyler Boyd and Trenton Irwin. They're directly eating into one another's snaps. If you just look at their respective snap rates in the last 3 games, Tyler Boyd, the game that he got hurt and only played 2% of the snaps, that was a game that Trenton Irwin played 93%. Since then, it's been 80% Boyd to 24% Irwin, 64% Boyd to 47% Irwin. So you can see that basically when one is on the field, the other is not. So certainly a max one spot. If you want to play Trenton Irwin, I don't think that is my style of play. I do think Tyler Boyd is more locked into the slot role than maybe recent snap rates would indicate. You're going to have to give Trenton Irwin a big boost if you want to get some of that tonight. If you're using an optimizer, if you're using the solver or our projections, you're not going to get Trenton Irwin. So I think you kind of have to make that assumption that he either squeezes Boyd out or just runs insanely hot on his limited snaps in order to pay off that price tag. But for me, he would be in an MME player pool because I think anyone that has a projection should be. But for me, I don't think I'll get to any Trenton Irwin tonight. And I think Tyler Boyd is an okay secondary option as part of like Joe Burrow double stacks, or if you just need a piece to get different in tournaments.
Yeah, and I think taking a stand on Irwin would be a little chasey for me. Like, not Jamar Chasey off last week's 2-touchdown game. I think that you talk about small samples and running hot. Like, I think that's kind of what that was with Trent Irwin last week. Boyd also had been banged up a little bit, so maybe they were easing him back in as far as snap split was concerned. I prefer Boyd as well. The most interesting name here to me, and I kind of was just messing with some cash constructions, Hayden Hurst, I think is super interesting. Back, fully healthy apparently. We saw his role in this offense before the injury look really, really good. He's only 3,000, makes a lot work. Really interesting play to me. I think at 27% total ownership, I could feel some Hayden Hurst tonight.
Absolutely. I was about to be concerned as I was getting ready to write up this game that he would come back in a limited role and we'd see some mixing back in with him and Mitchell Wilcox, but a full week of practice, not on the final injury report. At 3K, I think he is a very, very strong cash game consideration where you're looking at plays like him and Isaiah McKenzie in the kickers. I think Hayden Hurst is close to a must, assuming we don't get any news that he'll be limited or anything like that in his first game back. A 14.5% target share this season when healthy is just really strong. In the way that we project this game to be played, I think he pays off that price tag quite frequently.
Yeah, you could do like one of the quarterbacks and captain with their top pass catcher. So if you go Allen, you can go Diggs, and then you can go both kickers. And if you go Hurst in there, it makes a lot of work.
It does. And I was concerned when I started to write up this slate that, like, before even looking at price tags, that it was going to be really hard to captain one quarterback and roster the other quarterback and get one of the alpha wide receivers. Yeah, it's really easy, guys. I think that is a really strong start to cash game roster constructions. It might be a little bit of a coin flip between, which stud wide receiver do you end up getting to pay up for, and you just hope to land on the right side of the coin flip there. But I think anyone playing a different cash game roster construction from at least like a shell perspective is probably making a mistake tonight.
Yeah, that's where your coin flip comes in. There's two options, I think, for cash where your coin flip comes in. I think it's look at me talking cash like I'm
cash
doing
this. Gary's back.
Cash game. I think it's picking which receiver you use between Diggs and Chase, basically, and then deciding if you want to go the quarterback in your captain or go the receiver in your captain, which will open up a little bit more. For example, if you go receiver, maybe you can go up to Knox instead of Hurst, and you can do some interesting things. But someone mentions Bills have been very good against tight ends over the last couple of years. At only 3,000 though, with his role in that offense, especially if we think this game goes over 50 points, I am not reading into the matchup too much there. Personally, I don't know if you feel differently.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. If he was, closer to where he should be priced, assuming full health, I think he would probably be 5,600, 6K in this matchup. And that would be of concern against this Bills defense. But where he's just 3K, 8 to 9 points would be a smash for Hayden Hurst. Anything more than that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Any interest? I mean, we saw Mitchell Wilcox be in this number one role over the last couple of weeks, didn't get much done. And then, Trent Taylor we have for a projection as well. These are just fringe 150 set guys for me personally.
Yeah, for sure. I would not play, obviously, Wilcox alongside Hurst. So I would just completely remove Hayden Hurst in any lineup that Wilcox appears. But another guy that, maybe a 3 to 5% sprinkle at max in a 150 set would be fine.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Let's talk defense and kickers. And as opposed to a lot of these other showdown sites we've been doing lately, I don't think defenses will be as attractive considering we have a big game total here, especially compared to like last night and some of the other ones we've been doing. You see the Bills do have a slightly higher ceiling projection and base projection than Cincinnati does here. I like Cincinnati's a little bit more at less ownership and less salary at home. Their defense has really been clicking. Josh Allen has been prone to making some mistakes this season. So I just think as far as a little bit more mistake prone than Burrow, bigger plays can kind of lead to some bigger pick six opportunities, whatever. I think that the Bengals defense is quite interesting personally here. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time on the show that the time to play defenses is not when it's a 35-point total and both offenses are going to, drop back at a 45% clip. It's in these high total games when we know both offenses are going to drop back, when there are more opportunities for sacks, for pick sixes, for strip sacks. And that's how we can rack up fantasy points from our defenses. And we're going to get paid off with really low ownership. We're going to get paid off with a really good price tag. And if you just look at the ceiling projections in the table relative to the players that they would need to beat, the players that they're priced around, you have a 10.6 projected ceiling for the Bills defense. That's right there next to Isaiah McKenzie, right there next to the kickers, who we'll get to in a second here, right a little bit below James Cook. I think that there are certainly paths for them to beat a majority of those options in that price range. And you can do a really simple 1v1 in more popular roster constructions where you get off of some of these middle tiers or cheap skill position players and get onto the defenses and instantly make your build a little bit more unique. So I like the defenses tonight. And at that respective ownership, I think they're both pretty good plays.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Slight preference for Bengals, but I agree with you on as a whole. All right, kickers, mentioned that they look good in cash. Both these guys I think would play into kind of your theory on kickers, where we have two probably high implied team totals, two high power offenses, and two kickers that have big legs and an ability to put up big scoring games. We've definitely seen it out of McPherson over the last 2 years, and Bass is also no exception to that. Almost projecting identically, both in ceiling, base, ownership, captain ownership, like everything. So I think I'm just using them more when I'm looking for an onslaught. If I'm going 4-2, 5-1, that's kind of how I'm going to pick which kicker would make either of my lineups. But definitely think both guys are solid plays here.
And I really wish I could help differentiate between these guys and help give the right answer on which guy do I play, or which kicker do I play given X roster construction. I get the question all the time: if I've got a captain quarterback, should I play the opposing kicker or the same team kicker? There's really not much historical data that separates the two. You're just kind of hoping to run hot, that the drives stop a little bit short and you end up getting the field goals. We saw it last night with Justin Tucker and Chris Boswell. You just kind of are hoping to be on the right side of the variance in terms of scoring drives, not finishing in the end zone. I think both make sense for cash game roster constructions. I haven't really played around with a cash game build that has both of them yet, although I think that that's probably interesting, would get you off one of those skill position players that we alluded to earlier in the show. But I think both Tyler Bass, Evan McPherson, fantastic plays tonight, really safe floors given the high totals, and relatively strong ceilings as well.
Yeah, agreed there. All right, Cody, this is a really fun one. I have about 4 or 5 more minutes. If anyone has questions, I didn't even ask Cody if he has the time, but even if he doesn't, we'll take a couple questions if you have them.
Let's do it. I was gonna scroll back because there was a question we kind of skipped over. How much is a slight dock? I think this was in reference to Chase and Higgins, and I think you could maybe apply this, though the price tags are different, on Diggs and Gabe Davis, given the way that they score their fantasy points. For me, you have to play with it to see what type of roster constructions you're going to get. I would start with maybe 6 to 8%, see how things shake out for you, and if you need to go up or down from there, then you can start to make those decisions. But just thinking about how much of a dock that would be to their median or ceiling fantasy projection, and then seeing how much that ends up giving you in your optimizer and kind of adjusting from there. I think 20% is pretty hot. Anywhere between 6 and 12% would be a good starting point for me.
Yeah, when I do this stuff in NBA, I usually start around 10% as well. Yeah. And that could be a dock up or a dock down. Like if I'm trying to correlate, like basically what the Knicks are playing the Suns right now, and if I said I want a Chris Paul in the lineup, but I want to boost up Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson in those lineups, I do 10%. Usually I'll start there and kind of go from there. Alan asks, can we play P. Ryan and Mixon together? Same goes with Bills running backs for sure. I don't see why not. I think we always say on Showdown sites, we don't rule, 2 running backs out together from the same team. I think it's a little less attractive tonight in a game where we're expecting to be super pass heavy, but I wouldn't rule it out on a 1-game slate. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you're expecting an outcome that's a few standard deviations below what what the median expectation would be. You're assuming that a lot of the pass catchers and probably a quarterback, if not both quarterbacks, fail in those outcomes. So it's still a situation that I'm docking, and that would be another slight dock, probably 6 to 8%. Although I don't think you get a ton of it together naturally anyway. But I think I'm more of the mind that I'm trying to avoid it without entirely grouping it out.
Yeah, I agree. George, I'll answer this question quickly. We don't have time for like a really nuanced answer here, but I try not to use max exposures in optimizers when I'm 150ing. I think that's how you get yourself in trouble, because although the solver does a good job where like they try to spread out where that exposure is going to, a lot of optimizers will just say, okay, if I hit the second I hit 20% on this guy, the rest of my lineups are not going to include that person anymore. So what I'll instead try to do is use, boost or thumbs down, or I'll try to mess around with the projection to get the amount that I'm looking to get, more or less. Frank asks, how different should I be if you're making 1 milli maker lineup? Really different, Frank. Get as different as you can.
Very different.
In 1 milli maker lineup, get as unique as possible, for sure. Anything else here? In 2-4 lineups and 4-2 lineups, should one of the 4 always be in the captain position? That's interesting. I don't think so. I think you could do a 2-4, and have one of the 2 be somebody coming back on the other side. For example, I can see a Diggs in the captain with, I don't know, Bass or something like that. And if Diggs has a huge game, but not enough for Josh Allen to pay off his tag, where the Bengals then win by 2 touchdowns and you need 4 Bengals on the other side, I don't see why Diggs can't be the guy you want in captain there. Would you agree with that? Just as
this same roster construction won last night with a 2-4 Baltimore versus Steelers team that had Mark Andrews at captain with Tyler Huntley in the flex, and then you had 4 Steelers surrounding it. Yeah. Where I would be a little bit more cautious is in the 5-1s, where I think a majority of your time in 5-1 lineups, the 5 side should be your captain. So if you're running 5 Bills, I think you should run a Bills captain. If you're running 5 Bengals, I think you should run a Bengals captain. Just kind of goes back to the fact that you're assuming one team is onslaughting. It likely means that the opposing offense, if you're running the one, does not have enough pieces to propel itself to a captain-worthy performance. So 4-2, 2-4, totally okay to run a captain from the opposing side, but in 5-1s, 1-5s, I would not.
Yeah, agreed there. I have people asking about like true punt captains, like guys with very small projections, Khalil Shakir, for example. I am not interested in that. I think for me tonight, the main running backs can be in play as captains, Singletary, Mixon. I'd have a hard time going under Gabe Davis as a captain option tonight. Even James Cook, Tyler Boyd. I guess you could throw, if you're handling a couple, like a Dawson Knox captain lineup in there, just as like a 2 touchdown outcome. I don't know if you agree. You have a different feeling here.
Yeah. Historically, the thing that people get confused with in playing like the true punt captains is they think if they just beat the median projection, if they just give me a valuable performance, that's probably enough because I can fit all the studs in the flex around them, right? It's generally not enough if you just get that median type, or if they beat their median projection or even have a really good game. They need to compete with the slate's top overall scorer. So if you think there's a cheap captain that can do that, I think Dawson Knox makes sense for his 2 touchdown type games. Maybe Tyler Boyd, if he runs hot on touchdown efficiency and catches a bunch of balls out of the slot. But like below that, I don't think that those guys have that within their range of outcomes where they can truly compete with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Josh Allen and all those guys. So I think that is one common showdown mistake, is that you can just get away with a good performance from your punt captain to fit all of the other studs in flex. You really need them to come close to competing with top overall scoring honors, if not being up there themselves.
Yeah, I guess Boyd's a good call. I mean, we've seen some crazy, like it's 1 or 2 a year, but we've seen some spike games out of Boyd before that would warrant captain consideration. All right. I think that's going to do it for us here as far as questions are concerned. Really fun one here. This was a fun game to talk about. Cody, neither of us did particularly great with our flag plan calls last night. So I'll throw it back to you as far as having the honors. We'll give this another try. I have a couple different directions I can go. So who do you like tonight as far as captain is concerned? As far as flag plan is concerned.
Shout out to Tony Soprano, Saul Goodman in the Establish the Run Discord. He incorrectly called out my Gabe Davis flag plant tonight. I am, however, going with another wide receiver too, T. Higgins. Come on down, T. Higgins. I think that the ownership gap between he and Jamar Chase is going to be too wide. I am firmly of the belief at this point in their respective careers now that Chase is the alpha wide receiver one in this offense. 25.9% target share, 37.0% air yard share, 29.4% area end zone target share, all better than T. Higgins for the underlying metrics. But that does not mean that in a 1-game sample, in a 50-point total, that T. Higgins cannot outscore him and cannot be the highest scoring player on the slate, where he's separated by just $800. I think that the ownership gap is going to get very wide tonight. I think Jamar Chase is going to push 55, 60%. We get 25 to 30%. T. Higgins, I think that's fantastic direct leverage. And I like T. Higgins to be the optimal captain tonight.
Yeah, I like that a lot, for sure. I think he's a fascinating play. All right, you know what? If you didn't do it, I will. I'll go Gabe Davis here as my flag plant. And it's really the way we talked about it before. It's my flag plant to get well over the field at captain. I'm not really concerned with my total flex ownership here, but when Gabe Davis hits, he hits in a big way. We saw it in week 5. We saw it in the divisional round last year. We know he's on the field for pretty much every receiving snap of one of the highest power offenses in football. Really, last time I flag planted him, I was on Established a Million in that divisional round, and he had that all-time great game. So let's hope that I kind of tap back into that luck here. And I think at only 6,400 to get, 8, 9, 10% captain, I think is a viable way to play if you're mass entering tonight on Gabe Davis. I'll say this. I love Stephon Diggs as well. If he wasn't 50% total ownership, I think I'd be interested there. So, which is weird because I think I like the Bengals side more here, but I just think these two plays are both very good at respective ownerships and ceiling outcomes here. So there you go.
Yep, I think the Gabe Davis captain getting, overweight in a 20 max or 150 pool, or even if you're just hand building a few lineups, I think that's a really sharp way to play the Gabe Davis, because I think he's going to fail pretty often, but when he hits, like you said, he's going to hit a big, big way, and you're probably going to want that at captain if he hits.
Yep, agreed there. All right, everybody, Happy New Year. This kicks off our final week of regular season Showdown content. We'll be back on There's a Thursday night game this week, right? I don't know what is the schedule as far
No
as last
Thursday,
week? No
two
Thursday.
Saturday games, and then a big Sunday slate.
Okay, so then the huge Sunday slate. All right, we'll stay tuned for what our showdown schedule will be for this coming week. But happy New Year! Hope you all had a happy, healthy, safe New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and New Year's Day observed today. And I hope you enjoy a great, hopefully, what we hope to be a great showdown 1-game slate tonight. Really excited for that one for sure. For Cody, I am Gary. Good luck, everyone.